Welcome to chapter 10 of Tin. I hope you are sitting comfortably as we venture into a prison. Chapter 10. Don't think of it as a prison. Think of it as a home. Prison, thought Christopher. This wasn't the headquarters of the agency. Why had they brought him here? They were standing on a wide open plain. Mr. Reeves was looking up and smiling at the edifice that loomed above them in the morning light. It was a grey, turreted monstrosity, blistered with dozens upon dozens of windows. The windows were little more than slits in the lichen-covered rock. Great black streaks of damp rolled down from each window, and the horrid gaping hole of the black gate made it look as if the whole building was howling in torment. Christopher had also glimpsed a small tumble-down graveyard behind the building as they approached it. It was covered in moss and dotted with tombstones of soggy grey stone. Mounds of scrap metal were scattered around it. "They call it the Crag," said Reeves, smiling to himself. Christopher wasn't listening to him. He was too busy thinking about Jack and the others. There was an ache in his chest and he swallowed painfully, willing the tears not to come. In an effort to hide his true feelings, he spoke, but his voice was barely above a hoarse whisper, and he hated himself for it when he heard how pathetic he sounded. Seeing the glint of sadistic pleasure in Reeves's eyes only made it worse. "Never heard of it," he said. Reeves bent down and gave him a patronising look. "You wouldn't have," he said. "The Crag is a very special type of facility, but like I said, you can call it home now." Christopher looked at the grass at his feet. The blades were a pale green and mottled with brown spots, as if the foundations of the prison were poisoning the very earth. Reeves leant forward. "I said you can call it home." Christopher's eyes flitted towards Reeves's face and away again. "Say it. Say the word," Reeves hissed. Christopher closed his eyes. He thought of the junkyard. He thought of Jack and Rob and Gripper and Manda, and he stifled a sob. "Home," he said. "Say it again," whispered Reeves. "Home," he said again, and this time he gave Reeves a look that he hoped was defiant, despite the fact that his lips and chin were trembling. "Good lad," said Reeves as he ruffled Christopher's hair. Christopher felt a shiver of revulsion. A smirking Reeves didn't seem to notice. He turned to his companion. "Mr. Dunlop, if you would be so kind." Dunlop gave a grunt and produced a ring of keys from his Mac. He inserted one of them into the large padlock on the front gate. The padlock opened with a great clanking sound. One in front, one behind, they escorted Christopher through the gate and into a large courtyard. The courtyard was just as grim as the outside of the prison. The centre was taken up with great mounds of grey tarpaulin, from under which scraps of metal and old wheels and tyres spilt out. The sense of the walls looming overhead, almost constricting the air around them, was overpowering here. Christopher's world was growing smaller and smaller. He could feel his throat tighten and he felt a bout of dizziness. "But I don't breathe," he thought. "How can I feel dizzy?" Dunlop took out his keys again and unlocked a metal door in the courtyard wall. He pulled it open with a wrench and flakes of rust spilt from the edges. They entered a hallway and Christopher smelt rot and damp and stone. The corridor had a cement floor flanked by walls that were a sickly green. Paint was peeling off the walls in great swathes. Colonies of moisture, droplets and fungus collected in random patches. They walked about 50 feet down the corridor, unlocking another door on the way before they came to a set of double doors. Reeves knocked before pushing them open, and they entered a large laboratory. The lab was cement grey with a strip of blue and white mosaic tiling stretching along the length of one wall. The same wall had a sink unit and some stainless steel shelves bolted into it. There were several stained and rusty-looking surgical trolleys with various bits of copper, wiring and sheet metal piled onto them. There was a large hydraulic press set into a far corner, and what looked like a dentist chair was situated to the left of the door. There was a man in the centre of the room. He had his back turned to them, and he was working on an intricate collection of silver wires and tubes. "Well?" said the man without turning around. Reeves cleared his throat. "The device has been acquired as per your instructions, sir." The man flicked something, and a wire in one of the glass tubes sparked with blue light. "Very good," he said, and Christopher couldn't be sure whether he was referring to Reeves's words or his own work. The man grabbed a rag from a nearby bench and started to wipe the oil from his hands. He was wearing a floor-length grey leather apron, which looked completely at odds with his air of debonair poise. He looked to be in his early 30s. His features were finely chiselled and handsome. His well-coiffed hair was swept back over his head. "Excellent," he smiled. "Most excellent." He strode towards Christopher with his hand outstretched. Christopher was so stunned by the gesture that he immediately raised his own hand. The man grasped Christopher's hand in both of his and shook it vigorously. "Can I say how pleased I am to finally meet you?" he said. The man's smile was crescent-shaped, all-encompassing, dazzling. His teeth were perfect. His smile reached right up to the corners of his blue eyes, which shone with delight. Christopher was completely wrong-footed. He tried to open his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The man went down on one knee before him, and his eyes roamed over Christopher's face. "Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable," said the man. "Were there any difficulties?" he asked Reeves, without taking his eyes off Christopher's face. "No, sir. There was minimal resistance," Reeves replied. "And the engineer?" Reeves snorted. "If he can be called that. He has been dealt with. He believes he is now being kept under surveillance by the agency. He won't be revealing what's happened to anyone." The man clapped his hands with delight. "Ha! Yes, the agency. So the ruse had worked. Very good, very good." His grin broadened as he inspected Christopher's face. Christopher was confused. He felt dizzy. Who were these people if they weren't from the agency? He couldn't take in what was going on. None of it made any sense. The man held up his hands in a gesture of placation. "You're confused, Christopher. I can see that. But all will become clear very soon." "How do you know my name?" blurted Christopher. The man stood up and smiled down at Christopher, ruffling his hair in a gesture of dismissal. He turned to Reeves. "How old is he?" 12, allegedly. "Older, of course," said Reeves. "Of course," said the man, contemplatively stroking his chin. "And his memories?" "There's been erosion, possibly through trauma. I suspect this has been followed by tampering." "He's been patched, then?" "So I've been told." The man nodded. The discussion between the two men became a murmur in the background as Christopher's eyes darted around his surroundings. He felt a sudden scorching sense of indignation. "Why am I here? Who are you?" he demanded. Reeves blinked and the man seemed surprised. This only made Christopher angrier. "I'm sorry?" said the man. I should have introduced myself. I'm Richard Blake, son of the late Charles Blake, and like my father before me, I am, and I say this with all modesty, possibly one of the greatest engineers of the age." That broad smile again, as if Blake expected some kind of congratulations for his announcement. "I want to go home," Christopher shouted. Blake's smile faltered. He looked disappointed. "But my dear Christopher, you are home." Christopher stumbled backwards, moaning, "I want to go home." Dunlop made to grab him, but Blake waved him away. Blake got down on his knees before Christopher and held him by the shoulders. "Listen to me, Christopher. You're here now, and this is your new home. You're going to help us do something that will echo down through the ages. Do you understand me?" Christopher looked at Blake, but he felt dazed, as if he'd been punched. It was all too much. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Blake squeezed his shoulders. "We're going to change the world, Christopher. You and I. We're going to change it for the better." Christopher's rage was starting to fizzle out. He felt exhausted now, and the tears started to come. Blake's mouth opened in awe as Christopher started to cry, and once again his eyes roamed over his face, as if he were seeing a miracle. "Remarkable," Blake gasped. "The mimetic capability to create tears, fluidity and mobility of emotional transitions. These things have been beyond the talents of almost anyone for centuries." Blake stood up and shook his head in amazement. "Absolutely remarkable." After a quiet discussion between Reeves and Blake, Christopher was escorted out the double doors by Mr Dunlop. Reeves followed behind them as they made their way down the hallway. Christopher didn't have to look. He knew Reeves was enjoying his discomfort. He could almost feel the horrid sliminess of his smile in the air. They took a sharp right turn down a narrower corridor. There were a dozen metal doors on either side. Each one had a narrow, barred window at eye level. Mr Dunlop opened one of the doors and stepped aside for Christopher. Christopher hesitated. He wanted to run, but he knew there would be no point. Dunlop's right hand went to his Mac and he pushed it aside, resting a hand on the black stick holstered on his hip. "That won't be necessary, Mr Dunlop," said Reeves. He winked at Christopher, and Christopher suddenly felt the mad urge to rush him and claw his eyes out. But the feeling was gone in seconds and replaced by nauseous despair, along with the sense that he was being pushed forward by a greater force than himself. He stepped into the cell. "There's a good boy," Reeves said. Christopher felt the soft rush of air behind him, and then the sound of the door clanging shut. He turned to see Reeves's slyly maleficent eyes looking at him through the small window. "Home," he said, and then he was gone. Christopher didn't know what to do. He felt numb. All he could do was stare mutely at that narrow rectangle, while around him there was nothing but suffocating silence. He felt his legs give way, and he collapsed onto the side of a steel bunk. Christopher thought about Jack. He thought about Round Rob and Gripper and Manda and Estelle, and this time the tears came with even greater force.